Welcome to EENET's podcast series, Inclusive Education, Unheard Stories. I'm the series host, Ayman Qwaider. In this series, we hear from education stakeholders living and working in contexts where learners experience exclusion, marginalization, and oppression. Our guests highlight the challenges learners face and share ideas for how to achieve inclusive and empowering education for everyone. I spoke recently with Dr. Mohammed Alruzzi, a lecturer in childhood studies at the University of Bristol in the UK. Mohammed is originally from Gaza. We spoke about our experiences as learners and educators in Gaza, the current situation there, and what the future might hold for Gaza's education system. This is the first part of a two-part podcast. Since October 7, 2023, the people of Gaza have experienced unprecedented bombardments by the Israeli forces, resulting in about 19,000 deaths. Potentially, the number has exceeded this now. The number of course, keeps rising, as it may be much higher by the time we are listening. You're listening to this recording. So far, over 9,000 children have been reported, many still under the rubble of their homes. Over 300 schools have been damaged or destroyed. The latest number, about 200 teachers, educators have been killed. The impact of this war on Gaza's education system, its learners and educators, and its future is so hard to put into words. But we will try to, during this podcast, to shed lights on particular aspects of what's happening. And it's important to recall that the education in Gaza and attack on education in Gaza did not just start on the current war on the 7th of October. Israel's apartheid system and regime has been undermining the education sector in Gaza and in Palestine in general for decades, but has never and will never break Gaza's passion to learn, stay innovative, and be creative. Let me introduce Muhammad as well. He's a lecturer in childhood studies. He holds a PhD in social anthropology from the University of Freiburg, Switzerland, and completed his master's degree in childhood studies at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. Muhammad has collaborated with various international non-governmental organizations and the UN agencies, such as Mercy Corps, Terre des Hommes, the Norwegian Refugee Council, World Vision, and UNICEF. His professional journey has equipped him with extensive multidisciplinary expertise in addressing issues related to children. Muhammad's research has also explored child labor, child detention, and education policy. Originally from Gaza, he has co-founded the Gaza Children's Cinema, an organization directed to engage with marginalized and border communities. For over 13 years, Gaza Children's Cinema has been reaching out to children who often face greater challenges in accessing education resources. We will be hopefully hear more about his work and the Gaza Children's Cinema during this discussion. So let's meet my colleague, Dr. Mohammed Alruzzi. Dr. Mohammed, أهلا وسهلا. Most welcome. Welcome to the podcast. Um, if we would like to start with your connection to Gaza, about your experiences in Gaza in light of what I have introduced, tell us a little bit about your connection to Gaza.
Thanks, Ayman, and thanks for organizing this timely podcast. I think whenever, and we're used to this situation in the Palestinian context, whenever there is an intensity of conflict or whatever we would like to call it, usually, although we focus on children and childhood, we get lost in the details of counting the people who have lost their lives. but in doing so, sometimes we forget about the so many details that are got lost in that context. I was born in Gaza as a refugee in a Nusayrat camp. It's in the middle area of the Gaza Strip. And I went to UN run school, UNRWA, and this was an important part of my learning journey growing up. Also, I was born in a critical moment in the Palestinian history in terms of a mobilization of the young generation of children, because I was born in the context of the first uprising or the first intifada, which in which Palestinian children were key participants, political participants in that process. And I still recall the Israeli soldiers coming to schools and trying to search the schools and try to arrest some kids, trying to prevent children from protesting. These are kind of some of the vivid experiences that I have experienced myself, and I saw see people who have been directly targeted. So, putting what is happening right now in context, this is not like new practices. Israel didn't break new red lines, to say, but the intensity of what is happening probably is can be described as unprecedented. Um, Growing up as well as a learner, I recall kind of completing my high education, my high school, and trying to receive my higher education by going to the West Bank and to study in one of the universities there. And I wasn't allowed basically to cross about 15 miles from the Gaza Strip to the West Bank to undertake my bachelor degree. I was interested in studying occupational therapy, which is one of the applied medical sciences that deal with people with disabilities. At that point, there was no single occupational therapist in Gaza. That was in 2003. But Israelis authorities didn't allow me and another 10 students from just crossing between these two Palestinian territories, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, which was have many repercussions on our educational journey. And I'm saying this just to give you an example about education under these circumstances, what it means to lack mobility, what does it mean when you are denied access and denied opportunities to education, not only as a child, but as you grow up as well. And of course, this kind of lack of access also continue as I grow up in, for example, opportunities for doing research, opportunities for receiving my education. I mean, all of these kind of things are an integral part, I would say, of the life of Palestinians, both in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, in Jerusalem, but also inside Israel. I think what is happening right now, as I said, it's unprecedented, but it's not a new policy of Israel targeting schools, targeting schools, especially as shelters, is something which has exacerbated the suffering of the Palestinian children and childhood. And to be honest, I'm a bit shocked that although these kind of incidents are happening at that intensity, we're not seeing sufficient reaction in terms of condemning it and in terms of like preventing it even from happening. Because I mean, condemnation in that context wouldn't be sufficient. I would say. So this is like more or less a quick idea about like several milestones of my life growing up in Gaza and education, and probably we can speak more about details of these juncture in this interview. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mohammed. I think you have provided a vivid picture of the violation of the basic right to education, where not only started or violated from the 7th of October, but there is contextualization of that violation of the right to education for Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza for many, 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 many years. I would say probably since the occupation started. And we see how the violation of the right to education is manifested in many different forms. For example, you highlighted the access of movement, where you were denied access to go to pursue your master's degree or your undergrads in the West Bank, was supposed to be another part of Palestine. And I mean, it's quite interesting, that you were trying to pursue a major that is lacking in Gaza at that time. And we know how therapists are really important, or they play an important part when it comes to providing inclusive education. I mean, not in terms of clinically, but also, of course, clinically, but also having them as a resource to the supporting teachers, really, really, really important. Can you tell us a little bit more about, like, why and how do you think the lack of professionalism, a lack of training opportunities, and because many teachers and educators and university teachers are not allowed to travel out of Gaza because of of course, 16 years of the blockade, and because of the regular bombardment and military campaigns that Israel conduct in Gaza. Tell us in long term how this is impacting the education
I
sector in
think
Gaza.
if we have to look at lack of opportunities in Gaza, we have to put it in the broader context. And here, I would like to think about the long years, long decades of occupation, and what were the Israeli practices and policies put in place in order to dismantle and to put more barriers and challenges in front of Palestinians' education. Probably a few years ago, I did some kind of research for a Shabaka network, and I was looking at the education across the different generations, and I was exploring what were the Israeli policies which were put in place in order to make the education of Palestinians more difficult. And I think I can think about many policies which were enacted. Some of them are about lack of mobility. Some of them is about putting kind of preventing schools and universities from working. We do remember in the context of the first Intifada, for example, the closure of schools for several months, leading to an educational loss for many of the students. And the key point here is that when the school year is interrupted for many children, there is a risk that those children will not go back again to school. So this was a common practice, and it was practiced widely in the context of the first Intifada. But also, the Israeli policies against Palestinian education continued in the context of conditional funding, in the context of Oslo and the so-called peace process, saying what kind of curriculum Palestinians should have, what kind of educational system Palestinians should have. Although the Palestinian Authority was supposed to be a kind of a self-governance system where Palestinians can really run their educational system. I recall around 1999, 1998, many funders, many educational funders, like for example, Italy, Norway, other countries, withdraw their funding to the Palestinian Authority because they were under pressure by a committee which was organized by the US and Israel and Palestinians to look at the curriculum. And it was basically about censoring curriculum. And there are many other instances where you can see the active um, kind of practices of Israel in trying to minimize opportunities for education for Palestinians. I did my PhD on education and labor in Palestine, and I was looking at three different generations, political generations of Palestinians. The first one is the first Intifada, or children who grow up around in the first Intifada, and the second one, in the context of the peace building, that's Oslo era, and then the third is the second Intifada. And I was looking at changes in education scene. For example, school enrollment, what kind of value Palestinians attach to education across these three different eras. And I observed that education to Palestinians has been central and hasn't been like a choice. For them, it was something that they can carry wherever they go, especially for being refugees for most of their lives. And investment in education has been uh, probably increased because Palestinians saw that there is an opportunity, there is a hope for the future. And we can see this, for example, in the investment in education around the Oslo era. Palestinians started to think like maybe we will have chance, maybe we will have state, maybe we would need these kind of skills, and they start investing in that direction. Before that, and because of the Israeli policies, especially around the years of occupation, 1967, Palestinians were pushed to abandon education for many years by trying to encourage Palestinians to work in the Israeli market and to look for and to be kind of collar kind of workers, and which doesn't necessitate any kind of training or professional training or further education. And by doing so, Israel basically uneducated a whole generation of Palestinians. The options that were available at that time, there were no universities. Palestinians who wished to continue their education have to travel to other countries. Poverty was widespread, and it was really difficult for the majority of Palestinians to continue their education. And at the same time, you have this kind of easy work opportunities that you can have inside Israel, which was actually meant to be, because in this way, I mean, you are minimizing the Palestinian independence, minimizing Palestinian economy, minimizing Palestinian sovereignty. So it was part of a policy that was enacted around the 60s and the 70s
Mm.
on Palestinian. To sum up, I think there has been different changes in terms of managing education and working with the education of Palestinians across time. And each of these kind of political eras, political milestones, have been characterized by different forms of control, surveillance, and censorship. I mean, these are key characteristics of the education in Palestine. For example, we saw this how teachers were selected when Palestinians were under direct military administration between 1996 until the end of the Intifada. We've seen this kind of control manifested in mobilizing aid and aid conditionality for basically controlling how education looked like. And we've seen it now in a different form, basically preventing kids from going to school and targeting schools and targeting shelters, which has been known to be like designated spaces for sheltering for both children and their families.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Mohammed. And yeah, I mean, you struck me when you say that education has been used as, a means of liberation and maintaining the Palestinian narrative, and it's a part of their, techniques that they've been using toward liberation, and from occupation, from oppression. You brought me back to what my dad used to say. The best people go invest in businesses. I invest in you. In your education. So he managed to teach, all my siblings to complete their higher education in the midst of really um, um, very challenging realities in Gaza. But let me bring you back to the current genocidal war in Gaza, where we see that the entire education sector is being obliterated, teachers being killed, learners being killed, over 600,000 students and 22,000 teachers in Gaza have been impacted by the school closure. We're facing a school, loss. Basically, this year, the Ministry of Education already announced at the beginning of this war that they are canceling the school year for this year. Um, what's been described is unprecedented in terms of damage, in terms of destruction that impacted the human being, the people of Gaza, as well as their infrastructure, their civil infrastructure, and namely, I'm talking about the education sector here. So tell us, I mean, there's one question that is keep coming up from colleagues and from educators that I'm in touch with in Gaza, that they say we want to go back, we want to teach because they understand the value of education, because education gives them a sense of routine to go back to normalcy. It's a psychological kind of relief for them, etc. But given what they go through now, where each family basically has been impacted, okay, directly or indirectly by what is happening in Gaza. We're talking about half of the population are actually starving now. 1% of the Gaza population either killed or injured now. So the scale of devastation is unprecedented. So from your perspective, and in light of what's been described again as unprecedented in the modern history, we see sometimes when there's an earthquake hit some areas, there's still some other part of the country that receive education. If we look at the Russia-Ukraine war, for example, education to some extent was continuing in metro areas, in areas that are not in front of the clashes or the fighting. Um, Now we're talking about everything is destroyed in Gaza. No electricity, uh, the bins, the materials, the subject, everything is just lost. Leave aside the impact of trauma that I would say multi-generational trauma that they go through um, for long. The teachers and learners themselves in Gaza. What form of education we're looking at now here, and how do we expect the world to react to this situation in Gaza?
I think we can see, like from the media coverage, what is happening in Palestine. There is a lot of barriers, dehumanization of Palestinians, as if like their education, their lives doesn't matter as much. And this is something which is not very shocking. We're aware of like different levels of racism and kind of prejudice against Palestinians, looking at different uh, conflicts as well. I think what is happening now that probably it become a luxury to ask about education and reopening schools when this kind of killing machine threaten the very basic right for human rights, life, the survival. And you're right that having schools open as safe places, inclusive places, can prevent the exacerbation of the Palestinian suffering or the human suffering in that context. Why? Because as you said, it provides routine, but also it provides a space for children to feel safe and for for their family, and this is also equally important, also to feel safe that their kids are safe. What we are witnessing right now is mass displacement. Most of the population of the Gaza Strip has been displaced, has been moved from their place of residence several times, not only once, and they are doing so under inhuman conditions, including, for example, conditions for starvation, condition of widespread diseases, and we are speaking about um, uh, like really devastating situation. And what we see, unfortunately, just a few images coming out of Gaza, because also journalists are not allowed to come inside the Gaza Strip. Um, I think in previous kind of escalations or wars on Gaza in the last years, schools were also targeted, but Israel was never held accountable to its actions. We know that many of the schools have been directly targeted. Many of the warehouses of UNRWA and UN has been targeted in previous escalations, but Israel was never questioned about these kind of actions. Despite that, people still believe or perceive UNRWA institutions as to be kind of a safe place where they can seek refuge. And this resulted in most of the people going to UNRWA schools, especially when they don't have relatives to host them, when they have no place to go, and probably because these kind of UN institutions were seen as less dangerous. I mean, everyone understands that everywhere is dangerous in Gaza. There's nowhere to go, but at least in their perception, these are UN. Israel cannot do much to harm UN institutions. At least they will be um, kind of held responsible for their action. In this situation, this didn't happen, and unfortunately, the results
Mm,
are devastating. I mean, I'm aware of the situation that is happening right now in
mm.
many of the schools. Many of the schools have been targeted. Not enough support in terms of food is provided. People are suffering even for queuing to take bath, ensuring like the main taking showers and having access to toilets and hygiene and sanitation. So these are very basic things, and usually these are some of the untold stories about what's happening on the side of the conflict, because it's not only about the targeting, it's not only about losing the educational opportunities at schools, but it's also about the diseases that are now widespread in that context.
You've raised a crucial question here around the question of accountability, and we know that there is excessive amount of human rights organizations that have written about the violation of the right to education in Gaza, from Amnesty International to Human Rights Watch, including Israeli human rights organization, Palestinian. In the last, I'm talking about particular in the context of Gaza, in the last 16 years of 16 years of ongoing political blockade that impacted badly the right to education, and also the within 16 years the regular military campaigns that Israel waged against the people of Gaza, which also violated the right to education. Every time after a war or a bombardment happened in Gaza, the international community jump in to report about this. And we thought, or people would suspect that, okay, this might be an opportunity to hold Israel accountable, um, but unfortunately, this hasn't been the situation, and that's why potentially we see what is happening in currently in Gaza, where 60% of the education institutions in Gaza either destroyed or damaged, or that amount of like loss of a human being, teachers, educators, is unprecedented. And I think it's really important point that you highlighted, that when we lose uh, a teacher, like Rifat Al-Arair, for example, a poet and an educator and a narrator, like Dr. Tay, who is the director of the Islamic University of Gaza, um, like many other educators and dancers and artists and teachers, we're not losing only them as numbers. We're losing an asset to the community. These people understand the context. These people live the experience of like what like their learners So it is lost beyond what is what is recorded as number. Thank you for listening to the first part of this podcast with our guest Mohammed Alruzzi. In the next part, Mohammed and I discuss accountability, upholding human rights, and practical options for rebuilding education. We hope you will join us again. If you would like to know more about EENET work, please visit our website www.eenet.org.uk. You can access almost 1,000 free resources on a wide range of topics related to inclusive education globally. EENET, the Enabling Education Network, has been working since 1997 to help document and share experiences of equality, inclusive education in low and middle income contexts. We encourage critical reflection and support efforts to challenge the norms and expectations. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at info@eenet.org.uk or WhatsApp us on 44749 4110 655. This podcast is a copyright EENET 2023, all rights reserved. The host was Ayman Qwaider, producer Ingrid Lewis, and editor Dan Lewis.